Hello and welcome to the Game Theory Podcast. I'm your host, Sam Vecenie. We're presented by CLNS Media. Today on the show, we've got good friend of the program, Cole Zwicker, returning again. Wow, that was bad pronunciation. To talk about the Eastern Conference semifinals. These are really, really fun games that maybe if you're a Toronto fan, you're not super happy about, but if you're a Cleveland fan, you're ecstatic. And I think that even if you're a Philadelphia or a Boston fan, there's a lot to talk about within that still ongoing series. Cole, how's it going, man?
It's going well. I'm happy to be back on talking playoffs and to present myself as a target for Boston fans because I picked the Sixers in 5, and I felt pretty decent about that, and that has been flat out wrong.
Yeah, let's kind of talk about what has happened in this series. So, it's worth noting, I think, that there have been a couple of close games in this series, first and foremost. Like, we're not crazy far off of this being a very competitive series instead of a 3-1 series where Boston had a chance to sweep last night. But Boston has really, really performed particularly well in late game scenarios. I think that is definitely a credit to Brad Stevens. I think that Boston in general has been the more well put together team. You look at the way that Dario Saric and Robert Covington have struggled in this series. I think that that's not a coincidence given some of the matchups that they have at play. I think that the way Ben Simmons has struggled in this series is not a coincidence given how well Al Horford has played. And in general, I think it's not a coincidence that we're not getting the same Ersan Ilyasova and Marco Bellinelli experiences that we got in the first series, just because Boston is so good at taking away non-two-way players.
I definitely agree with all of that. And for me, it just comes down mostly to execution. And especially at the end of Game 3, we just saw Boston execute at a high level. It's not just Stevens, even though Stevens is a wizard. You saw that last inbounds play where it was run as kind of a flex screen at the top of the key where Horford was going to come towards the ball, and Stevens saw that they're going to switch that action with Covington onto Horford, calls a timeout. They run the same play kind of, but the opposite direction from the baseline side, so more low to the basket, and they clear everybody out. So it's an over-the-top pass to Horford that was just designed perfectly. So Stevens' ability to adjust in the moment is pretty unprecedented. I think he's the best guy in the league as far as seeing things and quickly diagnosing them and countering. But overall, I think everything you said about matchups, the personnel, like Covington, and his space defense has kind of been exposed in this series. And that's something I was worried about against potentially Toronto guarding like a DeRozan or a Lowry. We've seen that in this series. Like, he can't stay in front of a lot of these guys at times. He's not a lockdown kind of defensive stopper type. He's a two-way player. He's an excellent one, but everybody has their limitations. And a guy like Marco Bellinelli was one of the best, I thought, bench players in the opening round against Miami. I mean, I think it was the Sixers' highest scorer in that series or close to it. And this series is harder to play because the Celtics are hunting him with guys like Tatum on mismatches. So it just goes to show that, like, one series you can be valuable if you're not a two-way player, and the next series you might be picked apart.
So before we get into the whole thing that I want to talk about more than anything in this game and in this series, and in the NBA as a whole, I think it kind of stands up. How funny was it to see Brad Stevens call a timeout whenever he noticed that Marcus Morris in Game 3 was about to take just like a terrible 19-foot mid-range jumper. And he was like, no, we have like 5 seconds on the shot clock. I can draw something up. And then he draws something up and they get a bucket.
Very Brad Stevens-esque. I've seen him do that. I don't watch a ton of Celtics during the regular season. I've probably seen like 10 games or so, but you even see that in the regular season. Like, he's pretty good with that. If they're not doing what he wants and they're not getting an effective look and it looks like the play is coming undone, he will definitely call a timeout and recalibrate, and he deserves a ton of credit for that. He's
so reactive to what's happening on the floor. It's really great.
Yes.
Let's talk about the biggest thing that I think has been exposed, maybe is a word, but I would say maybe accentuated in this series is a better word, throughout the entire NBA. And I think that this series is a microcosm of it in a lot of ways. I think that perimeter defense and the ability to defend in space is still maybe the biggest market inefficiency in the entire NBA, because we aren't great at evaluating it yet. I don't think, just in general, like before this series, I think we probably would have said Robert Covington was a good defender in space, right? Like a pretty good one.
Yes, absolutely.
But what this series has kind of shown is that he's a good defender whenever he's able to kind of roam and do a lot of different stuff. He's not a great defender whenever he has to stop the ball and stop penetration. And if you listen to Brad Stevens, throughout the course of his coaching career, but especially in this series, what they want to do is they want to get 1 foot in the paint and they want to either swing it out or they want to take shots at the rim. right? He calls it spraying the ball, is just in terms of passing and getting out for open 3-point looks and getting defenses into reversals. So the biggest problem with what Philadelphia has right now from a defensive point of view is that they don't have anyone who is particularly good on ball whenever it comes to defending wings. Ben Simmons is a good roaming defender, a good help defender. He gets lost sometimes on the ball and kind of gets beaten in coverage. Covington, as we've now mentioned and alluded to a couple times, has really been beaten off the bounce, particularly by Jayson Tatum in this series. You look at Marco Bellinelli, you look at what we thought Justin Anderson might be. Like, we thought he could be that coming into the NBA. He's just not that guy, at least in this stage of his career. JJ Redick, obviously not necessarily a great on-ball defender. Dario Saric, not a guy who's known for his defensive prowess. The fact that these issues keep popping up for the Sixers is, I think, their biggest point of growth. They need to find a way to stop players at the point of attack. And I think you can look at the other series that we'll talk about later on. Toronto had no recourse in terms of point of attack defense whenever they had to put OG Anunoby and Pascal Siakam onto LeBron James, because Kyle Lowry is not an elite defender anymore. DeMar DeRozan, not an elite defender. Fred VanVleet was injured throughout this series, and I think that kind of pulled over to how much contact he was willing to absorb defensively. So I think that what you're looking at throughout the NBA is a situation where perimeter defense is so incredibly valuable in today's pace and space league, where you really need to cut off dribble penetration toward the basket. I think that we still haven't even seen we know how important it is, but we still haven't seen teams that have recognized that to its fullest extent yet.
I think the inefficiency is in two capacities. The first is just understanding how few actual two-way players there are on the wing. And there's usually always someone who takes something off the table on either side. Like JJ Redick, obviously, is going to take something off the table defensively, even though he's a good team defender. He doesn't have the measurables, doesn't have the athleticism to keep up at times. It goes on the converse too. Like an Andre Robertson for Oklahoma City is a great perimeter defender, but he's taking something off the table offensively in considerable fashion. So these guys that play both sides of the floor on the wing are insanely valuable. And I think there's a lot of he's just another 3-and-D wing we can develop. There's very few 3-and-D wings in the league that actually matter. And the second part of that is the degree of actual effectiveness as a team defender and as an on-ball defender. This is why Kawhi Leonard is so great. He's arguably in his own tier as far as perimeter defense, both on the ball and off the ball. You rarely see a guy who really matters on the ball. That's why I liked OG Anunoby so much in the draft, is because he matters on the ball. Off the ball, he can drift at times. I don't think he's perfect there, but those really true defensive stoppers, that's a word we overuse as far as guys. Covington is not a defensive stopper. He's a great team defender who can play in a pinch on ball, but you can beat him laterally. Mm-hmm. You can beat almost anybody laterally in the NBA. But the really true elite defensive stoppers, Andre Iguodala in his prime was one of these guys. They come around very seldomly, and those guys are insanely valuable. Yeah,
what Covington does best is Covington wreaks havoc defensively. Right?
Yes.
He's a guy that gets obviously a ton of deflections. I think he led the NBA in deflections this year. He's a guy that can really cause you issues in passing lanes. He knows how to play gap defense off the ball and kind of goad you into those risky plays and goad you into risky dribbling drives where he can get his hands in there. As we've said, he's not this super quick defender. And to be honest, I do think part of this is that he's also having maybe the worst shooting slump of his career. And that might be infiltrating his thoughts a little bit. We know at this stage how often defenders get into a headspace where they're not shooting well offensively, they're down on themselves. Maybe their reaction time slows down just that small amount, right? Just enough to where it's enough to cause problems for you and allow the guy to beat you that you're supposed to be defending with your life. This stuff happens and it's okay, but they need, I think, more than anything, to find a 3-and-D true wing next year, because Saric can shoot. Now, that's great. Covington, we think, can shoot, even though he's gone through a slump this series. Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid, for as much as Embiid likes to shoot three, he's not a great shooter yet. They need someone who can be that true 3-and-D wing, I think, more than anything that they need going forward.
And I agree, and I think they can get that via certain avenues. Maybe they can trade for Kawhi, but those guys are hard to get, man. You even look at
Paul
the draft.
George, another one.
I don't even think he's a stopper. I think he's a great team defender. He's got quick feet, but he still gets beat routinely. I don't think he's like a true stopper. So if you're going to put the threshold really high and the bar really high, there's very few guys that can satisfy. Like in the draft, even Mikal Bridges isn't really a stopper. Like he gets beat on the ball. Like he's not like an uber athlete. He's a great team defender. He can wreak havoc, and I think he's fine on the ball. But he's not like someone you're going to throw on an elite perimeter offensive player and like shut him down.
Yeah,
that's not going to happen. He's not Iguodala, and like Zaire Smith has quick twitch. He's not a perimeter stopper yet either. Most of that's technique, and he's a 6'5" guy, so he's not going to be an elite wing stopper either.
Also, these guys are like 19 and 22, and it's really hard to be good at defense at 19 and 22.
Very, very fair. And Avery Bradley gets this. He's very good point attack on point guards. He's not a good team defender, and he's not very switchable because of his size. He can still compete, but you can shoot over the top of him. This goes to show that just those guys, those true difference makers on the ball, are rare. And where you add the most value is usually via switching and via team defense, like being in the right place, having the length, having the athleticism, having the IQ. Because if your whole deal is I'm going to shut somebody down and that's going to be my primary job in the NBA, you better be like OG Anunoby and have those kinds of elite quick twitch athleticism, the strength, the length. There's just very few guys that have all of those components.
You know who is like really, really good at this now? I think Drew Holiday is close on this. Like he's still mostly just like a 1 through 3 defender, and you can cause some issues if you switch him on to bigger guys, but like he's really, really good at the point of attack, and he does have some versatility defensively, and obviously he can shoot, he can create, he can do everything you want. Like Drew Holiday is rapidly becoming an incredibly valuable player in today's NBA. Like Patrick Beverley even is another one where really, really good at the point of attack, really turned himself into a great 3-point shooter, struggles a little bit off the ball. You know what I mean? That's what makes guys like Danny Green so valuable, even though Danny Green, if you look, has shot under 40% each of the last 3 years. Now he takes a ton of threes, and he's shot like 35%, 36% from 3 the last few years, and that's okay. But Danny Green is valuable because he can play in a limited role offensively, still be a spacing threat who can knock down shots from deep, but he's also just a ridiculous defender in transition, on the ball, off the ball, wherever.
Exactly. And I think he brings rare traits to the table as well. Just the overall holistic point for me is that a lot of teams and a lot of fans will say, all we need is like this true 3-and-D wing to fit into the lineup. Like we can find these guys. And the reality is you can't really. Like the really impactful ones don't come around that often. Like Kawhi Leonard is a very, very rare player. He's much rarer than he gets credit for as far as historically what he can do as a shooter and a defensive player, both on and off ball. Every team would want to have someone like Robert Covington. He's a great player. Otto Porter is another great team defender with size, but he's not that quick, right?
Yep.
And you just don't find a lot of guys that bring all of that stuff to the table.
Yeah, and look, we're basically telling Philly fans, okay, you guys have to find like the 1 in 100 NBA players that can do this skill. They're not that far away. Like they're not like hoping on a wing and a prayer to do this. And like Mikal Bridges could develop into this guy if they end up taking Mikal Bridges with their higher end draft pick. They could end up with someone like a Zaire Smith or something along those lines who morphs into this guy. But I think that we should move into how Philly turned the tide in Game 4. And I think that it starts with perimeter defense. It starts with TJ McConnell basically turning into God. He had an incredible game last night. He was absolutely unbelievable for Philadelphia. Terry Rozier has no idea how to deal with him yet. Like he just hasn't figured it out. Oh yeah, and TJ went like 9 of 12 from the field for 19 points, had 7 rebounds and 5 assists. Like TJ was unquestionably the best player on the floor last night in a game that had Joel Embiid, Ben Simmons, like Jaylen Brown, Jayson Tatum, and Al Horford.
Go figure, man.
Basketball's so dumb.
Sometimes it's just so ridiculous that we actually spend time predicting this stuff when it's like TJ, and I love TJ McConnell, you do too, as far as a contributing player to winning in certain capacities. But if TJ fucking McConnell's the difference in the series, it's like, what are we really doing here? But he was fantastic. His point of attack defense on Rozier. And Rozier, for me, again, has been Boston's X factor the entire playoffs. Like when he's on, it's hard to beat them because he's their one kind of dynamic shot creator other than Tatum. Like Horford's just a different kind of player being a big. But when Rozier's really going and he's shooting the ball well, he's getting into the paint, he's a really tough cover. And I thought TJ just took him out of the game yesterday. And then he was able to contribute offensively. We can get into that with TJ playing point guard. But I very much agree. I think that McConnell, the odds are very much against the Sixers in the series historically. Yeah. I mean, no team's ever come back from this. I'm not saying the Sixers are going to, but I think they did find something that can be effective against Boston, and that was TJ McConnell.
So yeah, let's talk about the move of Ben Simmons kind of off the ball. Like, what position would we even say Ben Simmons played last night? Like, kind of a stretch 4, but like a playmaking 4, kind of. Like, he is, when he plays off the ball, he is like truly positionless in so many weird ways, because they have him operate like in the post, they have him operate at the top of the key, they have him operate on the wing. Like, he plays all over the floor in so many random spots that I think it's really hard for defenses to adjust immediately.
And this is what I loved about Simmons as a prospect right here. Like, some people ask, why are guys like Giannis and Simmons so valuable? They're not really shooting threats, but they can dribble. So what makes them valuable? It's the fact that they're 6'10", 6'11", and they're versatile. You can use them in different ways. Like, if Simmons isn't going on the ball, because Brad Stevens has really gotten Simmons' number, taking him out of transition, building a wall, keeping him out of the paint, sagging off, using Boston's strengths, which is fantastic. I mean, the schematic stuff that Stevens has done in the series is great, and they have the personnel to carry it out. But Simmons is versatile enough to where if you're going to take that away, he can be like, okay, I'm going to start setting screens and rolling to the basket. I'm going to start cutting and ducking and sealing these guys low and operating as a traditional kind of playmaking 4. And not a lot of guys, like no point guards, bring that kind of versatility to the game. And that's what makes him so rare as a 6'10" guy who can not only give you perimeter skill, but can also give you interior skill. Yeah,
the fact that he can do just about everything on the floor except shoot makes him valuable. Like, and that's like so obvious to say, right? If you can do a lot of different things well, you're going to be really good. But the fact that he is capable now of literally cutting off ball and getting wide open, or he knows how to roll into space in pick and roll coverages now in a really, really good way. Like, it makes me wonder why they haven't been playing TJ more with him. Like, it seems like, especially throughout the playoffs, they certainly have not been playing TJ with Ben Simmons, but even in the regular season, like, they didn't do this a ton. It seemed like to me, as someone who watched probably like 35 Sixers games this year.
Yeah, and I think it just goes to, as far as a team building standpoint, you have to build around even the transcendent talents. That's why Fultz fits so well, like prospect Fultz, I'll say, next to Simmons, is because you need somebody on your roster that can create off the dribble and shoot off the bounce in the modern game. If you don't have anybody that can shoot NBA threes off the bounce and create, as far as pull-up jump shots, that's a tough sell. Every good team has that input, and that's something that Simmons just doesn't bring. He has no gravity stretching out beyond the three-point line. You can really just sag off and take away his driving lanes, pack the paint, and it's hard for him to counter that because he's not as good of a finisher as like a LeBron, of course, who's historically probably the best finisher ever, and a Giannis who's on that trajectory. He just doesn't have that finishing acumen. So you need players to complement Ben's weaknesses, and I think that Fultz at his peak value is going to do that. But I think even in this series, they just need someone like TJ who can hit a mid-range shot, can hit a 15-footer off the bounce, bend the defense towards midcourt, stretch them out a little bit more. You need multiple contributing guys, multiple creators, honestly, overall. But you need that one guy at least that can shoot off the bounce at a respectable level.
So before we get into Boston, I want to talk about the Brett Brown thing that's happening right now. People have gone kind of crazy, like talking about how Brett Brown is a bad basketball coach. Now, I do think it's worth pointing out that throughout the course of Brett Brown's tenure, there have been some execution-related things that have made me very, very concerned. Like you look at some of the stuff at the end of games that have kind of plagued Philadelphia really up until this last 25-game run. I think that there's legitimate reason for concern in a lot of these places. The other problem is, though, that Brett Brown is so good at literally everything else as a basketball coach. He's great at building a culture. He's, I think, built a really solid defense around Joel Embiid, despite not having a crazy amount of terrific on-ball defense. His offensive stuff this year, I think, has actually been pretty creative with Ben Simmons. The end-of-game execution stuff, I think it's hard to tell how much of that comes from a lack of continuity early on and a lack of experience and mostly dealing with youth now versus some of the other stuff we've seen from these smart, experienced teams like Boston who have really smart guys like Al Horford running the show. Terry Rozier's been there 4 years. You can say, as much as you want about his inexperience, but I think we also know that Jaylen Brown and Jayson Tatum at this stage are definitely mature as human beings beyond their years. I think that there's just a lot to be said for late game execution and kind of absolving what we've seen of Brett Brown so far and not overreacting to him getting outcoached by Brad Stevens, who's probably like one of the two best coaches in the league.
Yeah, I can't really say that any better. It's hard to delineate between what is Brett Brown and what is the players just not executing. Like, is it his fault that JJ Redick threw that pass at the end of the game? Like, I don't know what the play design was, but Ben Simmons wasn't even looking for the ball. Like, I didn't see a lot of cohesiveness in their sets.
And he bumped Embiid. Like, in game 3, You're talking about the game 3 play, right? Like,
yes, correct.
He just ran directly into Joel Embiid. You can't, like, no one even blew up the screen. Like, I think it was Al Horford who was supposed to be guarding Embiid, and, like, he didn't even try and, like, blow up the screen or anything. He was just like, okay, I'm going to lay back and kind of read what happens here. And Ben just ran into him. Sometimes that stuff's going to happen.
And, I mean, Brett Brown has adjusted in this series. He didn't play Amir Johnson as many minutes, any at all in game 4, because he's just not giving them anything offensively. Like, he's a total zero there. Those lineups haven't been good from what I've seen via the eye test. I haven't looked at the numbers, but he's making adjustments in this series. Maybe it took him a little bit too long to go with TJ more consistently, just because TJ's been awesome in this series overall. When he's played, they've been effective. So maybe it took him too long to get him in the starting lineup or playing more minutes. Like, there's some pushback on should Ben Simmons be closing the game. I think that was game 3. I don't know. Like, I think you play to win. So whoever your best player is, I don't think you play for development when you're in the playoffs. Just my personal philosophy. I mean, these guys need big minutes, but I mean, if you need a basket down the stretch and TJ's the better option than Ben Simmons, I think you play TJ in a game 3. But I don't see anything that I'm really like objecting to Brett Brown's coaching style. Again, I just think he's going against a more experienced team. It deserves to be mentioned too. Like, guys like Joel Embiid, they make mistakes. Like, Embiid makes a lot of mistakes. He plays outside of his realm way too often as far as getting cavalier with the ball. That's not really on Brett Brown. That's just stylistically kind of the discipline level. That there's a huge difference between Al Horford, who just executes the living shit out of the basketball when he's on the floor. Like, that guy's ridiculous. Everything, if you mess up at all on a rotation, he will find the shooter. Like, Embiid is not that caliber of guy yet. So that bears mentioning too. It's not just the coaches, even though Stevens, in my opinion, is a better coach because he's just the best coach right now. That's not an indictment on Brett Brown.
Yeah, no, I don't think it is either. And we should talk about Boston now because you and I talk too much about Philly. Let's just be honest. We love that team so much. It is our small child, and we are going to root for it to continue to grow and mature. But Boston has been awesome in this series, I think in large part because Jayson Tatum has taken a very real leap from like, oh, he's a really good rookie that is probably going to be like an all-star someday to, oh shit, he might be an all-star right now. He is over 20 points in each of his last 6 games. He has not shot below 40% in any of those games. So like he hasn't even had like the really, really bad game at all. He's getting to the foul line a ton. He's just beating whoever Philadelphia puts in front of him, just like he was beating whoever Milwaukee put in front of him. And it's really, really impressive how quickly he is acclimated to such a big game scenario like this.
He's just fucking ridiculous, dude. Just bluntly, his play right now looks like he's 26 years old. I know people use that a lot as far as his maturity in his game, but the way he's producing and the way he's handling himself, he does not look like a rookie at all. Like if you saw him play for the first time, you're like, that guy's an all-star. And he's been in the league for 5-6 years. It's pretty ridiculous. But yeah, his play on both sides of the floor. Defensively, he's had some mishaps in the playoffs. That's what most rookies endure. But offensively, like you noted, he's beat guys consistently. He beat Ben Simmons. He's beat Robert Covington. They don't really have an answer for him because he can shoot as well. He can extend the floor out beyond 3. He can shoot off the bounce. He's been awesome in this series. I think that the one maybe nitpicky thing you can say about him is the finishing hasn't been there. Like it hasn't been consistently this season, but it's very nitpicky. He's still making shots. He's still being efficient, and he's been cast into a more primary scorer role because Boston, especially when Rozier's not going, and Jaylen Brown, I don't think is the same caliber of creator as Tatum is even right now, and he's not even fully healthy, of course. So he's been cast into this role where he has to score, and he's doing that.
It's the way that just Tatum does everything, kind of. It's the polish in his game, and like you said, it's very overwrought to talk about the polish in Jayson Tatum's game. But at the same time, like, it's the little head fakes, the little shoulder shakes, the incredible body control that he has once he gets going to stop his body and to stop his frame and decelerate so quickly and make guys go the opposite direction every single time somehow. He's very, very good. Plus, he has those long strides that allows him to get by defenders with ease. I love the way that they have used him a bit more as a spot-up weapon. They've done that a lot throughout the season, but I've noticed it a lot more when both Terry Rozier and Marcus Smart are on the floor together, because there's just that much more creation with the ball in their hands. And both Rozier and Smart are very, very good passers. And they just somehow find Tatum open every single time that he's open. And it gets the defense into rotation every time. And once he gets that foot into the paint, it's just game over. Like, the defense, just there's no recourse, really.
More than anything, I just like the way he competes, and he's contributing to winning in ways that rookies rarely do, buying into the system, playing both sides of the floor. Jaylen Brown's doing this as well, and he's not been healthy, and he's still, performing and having gutty performances, playing hard, disrupting a lot of plays. I think it was game 3 where Jaylen Brown was all over the offensive glass at the end, just making winning plays. And the fact that they can do this at such a young age, like, I would trust them. I try not to get too hyperbolic, but I would trust them in the finals right now. I would trust them playing these kinds of roles. I'm not saying they're going to win if they win against the Warriors. I don't think they would, obviously, but no. I think that they could actually present formidable opposition to these guys. And you just rarely say that about guys this young.
Well, I think that the reason you could say that, and the reason that I think Boston is going to compete with just about anyone they play at this stage, is that they're athletic, they defend the perimeter, and they can create their own shot. Like, I would feel a lot better about them with Kyrie Irving, because they would have even more creation on the floor. And I think that just being able to create your own shot is so essential against the Warriors, because they just put you in so many bad spots. But, like, the fact that they're long, they're athletic, they're switchable, they can do a lot of different stuff, I think it presents issues for Golden State. I think Golden State would probably beat them in 4 or 5, but, like, I think it presents issues.
And Boston has really swung for, like, the holy grail of player. I mean, not, like, we shouldn't say holy grail, but really valuable players. We talked about the value of two-way wings to start this. Jaylen Brown as a prospect had the defensive, he certainly had the NBA body, he had the twitch ability defensively. At least I questioned the offense, and he's really, transformed into a reliable shooting threat. I think that you don't want to leave that guy open anymore. He just has the confidence. He has the stroke. And then Jayson Tatum, he had more of the offense, but I wasn't quite as sure about the defense. He's played much better defensively than I thought he would, for sure. He's a better team defender. He's just smarter. They have two wings that operate as two-way guys. And that is that's invaluable in the playoffs. These guys can also play make. That's what separates them, is they can dribble, they can attack mismatches. If you put JJ Redick on them, they can take advantage of that. And those guys just don't grow on trees, and they have 2 of them. So from a team building standpoint, I mean, it's like a scarcity of resources, and they invested in wings, and they developed them to the point where they're two-way threats, and those guys are so valuable in the modern game. Yeah,
I think Boston should deserve a lot of credit for their draft strategy over the years. They've really invested heavily, really, I would say over the last 4 years since I've been doing this, at least, in perimeter players, in wings, in guys like a Jayson Tatum, like a Jaylen Brown, even like RJ Hunter. Like, they took a chance on RJ Hunter to see if they could develop one there. They've taken a chance on, like, a guy like Demetrius Jackson as a point guard, on Jabari Bird last year, and Kadeem Allen as late second round picks. And Kadeem Allen started a game for them late in the year. Like a Gershon Yabusele is a perimeter-based 4. They really just have tried to find guys like Marcus Smart and James Young, and kind of sprayed a lot of different directions. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But I think that they're reaping the benefit and reaping the dividends of that now, because getting someone like Shimi Ojale in the second round is much more valuable than getting someone like Rakeem Christmas or something like that in the second round.
Yep, exactly. And I think Shemi Ojale has already provided and already lived up to the value of that pick, just based on his defense against Ben Simmons and Giannis, more so even in the first round. So they have a clear strategy. I mean, they favor strength. That's something you look at with their perimeter guys. Most of them are strong. They have developed NBA bodies, and that strategy's paid off. I mean, I totally agree with what they're doing as far as targeting scarcity of resources. You can't get a Jayson Tatum in free agency. Those guys just don't become available, maybe until their second contract, because they're unrestricted. But we also forget, these guys have Gordon Hayward, too, who's a two-way playmaking wing. Like, they have 3 of those guys now. Like, most teams might not even have 1. It's just their approach, at least, is consistent. They know what they want They have an identity, and they fully optimize these guys. I think they deserve a ton of credit for that.
I always forget that they have Gordon Hayward, throughout all of this. And Hayward is going to be so essential for what they run because Stevens knows exactly how to utilize him. He knows exactly how to use guys who are really good in pick and roll on the wing. He's very good at getting guys who are good spot up shooters like Hayward has developed into. And they're just going to be that much more versatile defensively next year whenever they have someone like Gordon Hayward and have someone like Shimi Ojale moves into an even more reduced role next year because Gordon Hayward is around. Now he'll be used situationally, but Ojale's proven that he can play now. He's a very valuable player. And it's just, this team has an embarrassment of riches, and it is going to continue to be an embarrassment of riches going forward.
I mean, they could play lineups with Hayward, Tatum, and Jaylen Brown together. All those guys are two-way wings who can dribble, pass, and shoot. That doesn't happen. You don't get guys who can dribble, pass, and shoot that has positional size, defensive versatility, and are relatively high IQ players. I still have some questions about Jaylen Brown off-ball defensively, but overall, those guys are all guys that every team in the modern NBA needs. And we talked about 3-and-D wings before. These guys aren't 3-and-D wings. These guys are actual playmaking wings. And that is incredibly rare to have three of those guys.
Yeah, no, it's going to be really fun to watch them kind of grow and develop. The last thing I want to note on the Celtics is that Al Horford is just so good. He's so good at everything on a basketball floor. Every single little aspect of the game, from gap defense to walling off on Joel Embiid inside despite the size disparity, to defending Ben Simmons in space where he's been absolutely critical in slowing down Simmons in the half court. I think that Boston has also done a great job of walling off the Sixers in transition, which is where the Sixers derive a very high number of their offense in offensive possessions, is either in transition or in early offense where they get those quick little reversals for 3-point looks by Bellinelli or JJ Redick. Al Horford has played just such a critical role in everything that Boston does. And I think that, he has established himself again very clearly as a top 20 player in the NBA, just in case people forgot, because they always do.
It's just bizarre that people don't appreciate this guy. I think they're probably doing so now. People are like, oh yeah, he's been one of the best bigs in the playoffs, which he absolutely has. But you talk about a versatile Swiss Army knife at that position who can basically do everything well. Maybe not one thing elite outside of decision making, and he's really fluid putting the ball on the floor. Those are at least sub-elite skills. But his IQ just gives him so many avenues to be great because he's so cerebral on the floor on both sides. And he just shows a big who can pick and pop. They were killing Joel Embiid on pick and pop. So they changed their strategy a little bit with late switches. So Philadelphia had to adjust to that, but Embiid couldn't help on a driver and then recover to Horford. And Horford has the ability to put the ball on the floor, so when Embiid's closing out, he's blowing right by him. There's just so many different things he can do that you can't really take any one thing away because he is so versatile. If you switch, he can post. If you pick and pop, he can shoot, and he can put the ball on the floor, and he can pass on the move and pick out. Basically, anytime Philadelphia screws up a rotation, he's going to find the corner three-point shooter. So It's just the value of having a guy who plays both sides of the floor, has incredibly high IQ, and has a skill level to match. Again, very rare player.
Yeah, and just in case you're someone who needs all of this put into context, Al Horford is averaging 17 points, 9 rebounds, and 3 assists so far in the playoffs, with 1 steal and 1.5 blocks per game on a 67.7 true shooting percentage. And he's playing elite level defense, where he's probably been the best defensive player in the playoffs so far. That's insane. Agreed. That is just absolutely ridiculous production from any player, let alone a guy like Al Horford, who averaged 13.7 rebounds and 4 assists in the regular season on worse percentages. He's upped his game in such a significant manner in the playoffs, and I think he deserves so much credit for doing it.
Yeah, entering this series, I was like, okay, do they have the top-level talent coming in? It's Ben Simmons, elite talent, well, sub-elite talent, Joel Embiid, elite talent. Horford's outplayed both of them. So I think the argument for best player in the series, I think, has been Horford. So that's kind of an answer to that question. Is typically the best players in the series went out, and Horford's lived up to that billing. What do you think? How long do you think the series goes? Is it over in 5, or do you think it goes longer?
Oh, man. I don't know. I feel weird about this because Philly has made a very real adjustment with TJ. And yes. I think that Terry's going to have to really adjust to what we've seen from TJ McConnell so far. I don't know. What do you think? if you're making me pick, I'll say Celtics in 6, but like I honestly don't know.
I don't either. Honestly, I'm in the same boat with you. I don't know how to lean because I do think that Philadelphia made a critical adjustment in their defending Boston. They defended Boston better in Game 4, but I mean, the calls in that game, the officiating was a huge debacle overall.
We got to get Scott Foster and Tony Brothers up out the playoffs. Got to do it yesterday.
Yes, and Boston, I think their role guys will play better at home, so it could very easily be over in 5. And historically, of course, no team's ever come back. I don't know, though. There's something about this Philly team. I just can't quit them. I just think they have the guys who can influence games. They need Covington to play better. That's the thing is, like, maybe in this Game 5, Covington gives them performance off the bench. They're going to need somebody to step up because, again, Boston has countered Simmons. I want to see how Brett Brown uses more Simmons off the ball. If he just fully commits to that, it's like TJ's going to initiate the offense. We're going to have 2 bigs that are super versatile and run sets off of those guys in that way. So I don't really know what to expect in Game 5 so much as far as approach and like how these guys are utilized for the most part. I mean, history says that Brad Stevens will come up with more counters, which he undoubtedly will. But I don't know. I don't feel comfortable picking either way. I bet against the Celtics at my own demise very consistently, so it wouldn't surprise me either way.
Yeah, it's worth noting that over the last 2 games in Philly, Boston has not had a 100 offensive rating. Now, obviously, Boston held Philly to a low defensive rating in Game 3 that allowed Boston to win in overtime, but I don't know. I mean, it's worth noting, too, that Philly hasn't even caught like fire yet from 3 range. Like that, I think that's going to happen at some point because they have too many good shooters. And Boston's selling out against their shooters for sure. They're doing a great job of defending the shooters. But at the same time, whenever you're talking about a team that can shoot the ball like Philadelphia can, it's worth noting that, they've had 3 games now at 30% or under.
Yeah, and I also think that Philadelphia's defense is getting better. The first game, Game 1 in Boston, I thought their defense was horrendous as far as just matchups, like starting Simmons on Marcus Smart playing against Shemi Ojeleye and him not even roaming. I didn't understand that approach at all. And if you're not going to utilize him as a roamer and like disrupt, back cuts by Jayson Tatum, you have to play him on a Jayson Tatum to utilize that athleticism so Tatum doesn't kill Redick. In Game 2, I thought that Philadelphia's transition defense was horrendous. And it seems like they're finally starting to put it together a little bit. It just might be too little too late. We'll see. But they have made the requisite adjustments for the most part. We'll see how Brad Stevens counters that.
Yeah, let's move on and talk about the Cavs series, which is now over. Cleveland has swept the Raptors. I thought the Raptors were going to win this series. I was sorely mistaken. Look, we'll talk about Toronto in a second. Cleveland deserves all of the credit in the world for this, and they have now readjusted to the point where they're a very real threat, I think, to go back to the finals. I don't think that they can beat either Houston or Golden State, but I think that they're probably the pick to get to the finals now, right? I mean,
this goes back to my adage. I pick Cleveland in this series just because I will never pick against LeBron, but I don't have to. And that guy is just, I literally don't have any words to describe his performance. I mean, he's doing experimental, FU fadeaways that are, off the screen as far as arc at times. And, he's just unfathomably good. And Toronto had the personnel at times. I mean, OG is a pretty damn good on-ball defender, and there's just no answer for that guy when he has it going. Just nobody has enough firepower in the East, I don't think, to stop that guy. The whole allure for me with Cleveland, we've talked about this many times, is the shooting surrounding LeBron. All the Kevin Love, Kyle Korver actions they run are just absolutely ridiculously awesome. Like the down stuff, they'll switch, they'll post depending on how the defense reacts. Some of that's Toronto's bad defense, and they just didn't play with the same defensive energy and consistent effort that the Pacers did. But a lot of this is just the fact that you put shooting around LeBron and Kevin Love starts looking like Kevin Love again, as far as all-star Kevin Love. George Hill somehow goes to Germany before Game 4 and comes back and looks like a completely different player as far as athleticism and bounce and everything. These guys, when they're humming, when Kyle Korver's coming off screens, they're formidable in the East. And when LeBron's playing at the best player of all time level in his 15th season, which is again insane, they're obviously going to be a huge impediment for anybody they play. Yeah,
I mean, this is maybe the best run of LeBron's career, which I feel like is saying a lot. But
that's nuts.
That's kind of where I am. I don't think I've ever seen him play like this. There was the first run to the finals where he had, everyone remembers the crazy game against Detroit, right? Where he scored their last 28 points, I think it was. And that run was ridiculous. That was LeBron just at his absolute athletic peak, I think. But now he's at a more polished, more skilled, more like maybe mentally mature peak as well. And every single thing he does out on the floor just works. Like, he knows exactly how to get to his spots in a better way now. And he's become just this like buzzsaw of efficient basketball.
So I'm trying to pull up his numbers in the playoffs. I don't think it really matters as far as contextually. We can see that on the floor. Just his production on a game-by-game basis when the shot is going just makes them unstoppable in conjunction with the shooting that the Cavs have. And when they're really rolling, when they're hitting threes, like Toronto in Game 4 tried to play 5-out basketball and outscore the Cavs. That didn't go well. Toronto's defense was a disaster. I mean, they were blowing a bunch of switches. They tried to switch things, and the Cavs were killing them in these split cuts off the ball. But that system hums offensively when LeBron has the keys to it, and you can put guys like Korver, Love, George Hill, guys that are mostly dependable around the ball. J.R. Smith, if he plays well, that's a pretty formidable offensive five to go to war with.
Yeah, and we should talk about the supporting cast, too, because Cleveland's supporting cast was just much better in this series. I think it was a much better matchup for their supporting cast overall. Kevin Love didn't have to deal with Thad Young. Like, he was instead matched up with guys like Serge Ibaka and Jonas Valanciunas. He was able to get loose in a pretty significant way because of that. Obviously, the Raptors' best defender is OG Anunoby, and he was able to kind of, have to deal with LeBron, and guys like Kyle Lowry and DeMar DeRozan are just not great defenders at this stage of their careers. And, DeMar never has been, but like Kyle, I think is taking a significant step back defensively, and that causes problems for what Toronto wants to run.
Absolutely. And I think that guys like Serge Ibaka and DeMar really hurt Toronto off the ball defensively. Of course, Valanciunas does in space because, the Cavs were playing Jeff Green at 5 against Valanciunas for series. I think it was in Game 2, and they were like up plus 10 in the second quarter with that matchup. So playing small against Valanciunas works because he can still take advantage of the offensive glass, but I think you're going to win the math battle there. And Toronto, it's tough. I mean, I don't know if you want to transition into them fully yet, but man, this is kind of rough.
Yeah. So where I want to start first with Toronto is Dwane Casey, because it seems like, according to reports, that he's probably not coming back. He, I thought, was really, really bad in this series. Like, he was absolutely awful, I thought, to be frank. The biggest problem with what Casey did in this series was the defensive side of the ball. It's like he learned nothing from what the Pacers did. Like, they auto-switched everything. They basically just tried to tie Anunoby or Pascal Siakam to LeBron. Neither of those guys are good at defending in pick and roll, and anytime LeBron ran a pick and roll, they were just totally lost. And I just don't know what to do with what Casey did in this series, like in terms of contextualizing it positively. He didn't, like, Indiana. I think that Bob Voulgaris brought up a really good point last night on Twitter, or 2 nights ago, whenever the hell it was. He brought up the idea that Indiana runs a very different defensive scheme where they try and go over screens. They actually try and fight through screens, which is like this weird antiquated style now in the NBA. But it works because it's so different compared to what everyone else does that it kind of puts you in a bind offensively. And whenever you're so athletic at the point of attack with guys like Victor Oladipo, and even Corey Joseph's a pretty good defender, and Thad Young is a very good defender for a 4 in terms of his mobility, it causes a lot of issues for your offense. And I think that it's very interesting to me that Toronto didn't try and employ any of what caused Cleveland problems in the first set of games, even though we saw the evidence that what Toronto was doing was not working at all.
Yeah, it's a tough predicament for me just because I just don't know if Toronto has the defensive IQ. I know they were good defensively this year, but if you get them more in a switching style, can they really make the decisions? They made a ton of bad decisions on the floor. Like, Serge Ibaka killed them off the ball. I think DeRozan was falling asleep. He was helping off Kyle Lowry when there was Kyle Korver when there was no reason to in the corner. It's like, what are you doing? Like, is that really Casey? I think that they tried to switch more, and LeBron's going to kill that because he's the switch king. Like, when you switch against him and he gets favorable matchups, he dictates pretty much everything on the floor. So I don't know how much Toronto could have done. I mean, just looking at it personnel-wise, DeRozan wasn't efficient offensively. That's a whole different conversation. But I don't know, like, what lineups are they really running out that are going to, impede the Cavs for the most part? They have to kind of outscore them, and you try to play 5-out basketball with Ibaka, and he's just not making good decisions on the floor. And I know teams want to switch a lot. That's easier way to handle things. But if you're not cerebral in how you switch, it's not just about like, oh, I'll take this guy. It's the communication on the back line. If you hesitate at all, guys will just back cut you. And I think that's what goes overlooked a lot in switching schemes is like it's about intelligence too. It's about switching at the right time, getting out, passing guys off the ball. You don't want mismatches. You want to pass guys off when you get an unfavorable switch. And I just didn't see a lot of communication on the Raptors end. I think that is what ultimately damned them on the defensive side.
So I think that it's really interesting to me that Serge Ibaka and Fred VanVleet had the best net ratings of anyone on the Raptors in this series, because I thought Fred VanVleet in his minutes on the floor was actually really good for the most part. I thought that he like actually caused some resistance for what the Cavs wanted to do offensively. He still wasn't himself defensively, but he's so smart on defense that he was still able to cause some issues. And then on offense, he's obviously a great decision maker. And then on the other side of the ball is where you mentioned Ibaka. It's very strange to me that Ibaka ended up having such a positive net rating, because he was terrible in this series. I thought he was really bad. And I just don't know what to do with him anymore, because he's now drastically overpaid as a center. And if he's not going to be able to guard in space at all, and he's going to lose guys off the ball, like, are we at the point where Jonas makes more sense for them? Like, I don't know. I
thought that Jonas in that series was more effective in his minutes.
Frankly. I agree.
Like he at least punished the Cavs on the inside, and he took some things away and dropped coverages and pick and roll at the basket, at least contesting shots. I just thought that Ibaka was a mess, especially off the ball. Another element of this.
Hold on real quick on Valanciunas. And you know what Valanciunas does that, we can talk about the narrative of the Toronto Raptors till we're blue in the face, but like the thing that Jonas does and the thing that Fred does is that those two really fucking fight. You know what I mean? Like those two battle on the floor constantly, and they don't seem to have the brain farts that other guys do. Like Serge Ibaka gets lost. DeMar DeRozan gets lost. Valanciunas' fuck ups aren't because he isn't like totally engaged in the game or, just kind of loses someone off ball. He just can't do some things, right? Like he's just 260 pounds and can't move in space sometimes. Fred VanVleet is like 6'1" and not like an elite level athlete. But those dudes fight and they battle and they claw. And I think that if Masai Ujiri is going to continue to talk about culture, those are the guys that I think I want to build around, not necessarily someone like Serge Ibaka.
Yeah, I like having Jonas on my team. Again, it's just, you talked about the mobility, the movement skills, limitations. I mean, when the Cavs play Kevin Love and you get pick and pops, like Jonas is screwed there. Like there's just no way he can counter that because he's not quick enough. And that's just a physical limit. Yes, exactly. You have to outscore them. You have to live with the trade-off as far as him beating the Cavs up on the offensive glass or in the post. And against the Cavs, that's just a tough errand because, I mean, Kevin Love's such a good shooter, and LeBron is always going to find ththose guys. So it's not like the opportunity cost is significant there. But I like Jonas in a role, especially in the regular season. If you can have him, I mean, he has to take some blows off. Like Ibaka can't play full-time center. I don't think he can anchor down low and actually box guys out and be physical. Jonas is super physical. It's just his limitations are going to be at their peak in a playoff spread pick and roll kind of 5-out setting. He's just not going to be able to hang. And another element of this is the offensive playmaking from Toronto's bigs. I haven't watched a ton of Raptors basketball, so a lot of people chimed in with this, like Lucas Nogueira is actually a pretty good short roll passer. But I thought in this series, like Ibaka was bad there. His decision making was bad. His dribbling was bad.
Always has been. Jonas, that's always been his biggest flaw as a player.
Yes, and it really definitely reared its head in this series as far as his decision-making, his passing, his dribbling. He just couldn't do a lot. When the Cavs did trap Toronto's ball handlers, their bigs just didn't do anything with those advantage situations. The quick decision-making, the ability to hit the corner three-point shooter, it just wasn't there. And that hurts them. And that goes to like a draft point that I like to talk about is like bigs that can dribble, pass, and make quick decisions are valuable. They're going to be valuable in a series because not a lot of guys, I mean, like, in the Raptors case, like Jakob Poeltl can do that a little bit. I think that he might be their best player at that, but the rest of their guys don't really do that to the level that is necessary to really counter the Cavs scheme, like say a Domantas Sabonis did in round one.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And again, we can go back to Boston presenting a very interesting matchup, I think, for Cleveland in the second round. God, I don't know if I can handle the Brad Stevens narrative if Boston goes to the finals and would beat Cleveland, but that's a discussion for another time. Yeah. Let's kind of jump into the future conversation, I think, for Toronto here. Some people want them to blow it up. Some people think they should keep the status quo, just get rid of Casey or, do something small in the margins. Where are you at with this Toronto team?
I mean, I think this was their shot. I don't know how it gets any rosier from here. Kyle Lowry's not going to get younger. And we just seen this repeatedly happen in the playoffs where DeMar at the highest levels of play just doesn't play to the level that we've seen him play at other times in the season. And that happened again. It's like, what do you really do? What do you expect to improve with this core? Like, is Dalen Wright going to really improve? Is OG going to add more of an off-the-dribble game or something? I'm looking at where the upside is with this build because they already have $125 million committed for next season. Where is that spike coming from? I don't know if it is. And you just basically, you're a top 5 offense, a top 5 defense in the regular season, something like that. I don't know the exact stats, but you're formidable in both respects. You started moving the ball more. You had a better scheme offensively, more threes, and you still got swept by the Cavs because LeBron James exists. So it's not an easy choice. I just don't look at the roster and say, yeah, I think these guys are a credible contender in the next 2 to 3 years. But we talk all the time about what a franchise's vision is, what they want to do. If Toronto just wants to be solid and be a top 3 team in the East, I think they can do that. But if they want to compete for a title, I think we just saw they're way behind even the Cavs when the Cavs have LeBron, and the Cavs aren't even the best team in the league. They might not even be top 3 team in the league. So it's tough.
Okay, so here's going to be where I fall on this. I was someone who coming into the year said, I think that 2019 is Toronto's best chance at a title. I still feel that way, and the reason I felt that way was based on the idea of LeBron James might leave the Eastern Conference. You can't blow this up until you know what LeBron is doing. I think first and foremost, if LeBron is leaving and going west, keep the troops together here, go to battle again, and see what happens. That's my move. But I do think you have to be a little bit more vigilant here with the blow up button now, because I think that a lot of fans are very happy to win 50 games for a long time. Everyone gets pumped to win games, but winning is certainly better than losing. I do think you have to worry about a certain level of malaise that can happen with a fan base sometimes if it seems like there's no progress being made, right? Every time that we see these rebuilds kind of go through something, an organization is selling the idea of hope a lot of the time. They're trying to sell the idea of, we're 1 move away, we're 20 moves away, we're 5 years away, but you're going to get to watch all of these young players develop, and we're selling you the idea of hope to build toward our eventual goal of an NBA title. In Toronto's case, if you keep this group together and LeBron stays in the East, can you really sell hope now? It seems like this fan base is pretty demoralized by the idea of what they just watched over the last 3 years, where the Cavs have just beaten them badly in 10 straight playoff games. I don't know. I think that that's where it gets tricky. Now, the argument for keeping these guys together, even if LeBron stays, I think is valid, to be frank, because you could sell me on the idea of re-signing Fred VanVleet, OG Anunoby getting a lot better, DeLon Wright taking a small step forward in, what would he be, year 4, I think, at that stage. Pascal Siakam taking a small step forward as a young player. Maybe bringing in another low-level free agent. Masai Ujiri is also maybe one of the 3 or 4 most shrewd traders in the NBA. So maybe you trust Masai to take advantage of a bad situation around the league and add to this team in some way, add to this core in some way. But I don't think that that's the direction that I would personally go if LeBron resigns. I would probably consider trying to move Kyle Lowry. Maybe not Kyle, but I would certainly try and move Ibaka in some way. I would try and do something that doesn't involve moving DeMar, that doesn't involve moving VanVleet or or Jonas even, to be honest. I would want to keep Jonas now. I would try and do something that's a shakeup, but not a significant one.
I think they're kind of a fascinating destination for Kawhi Leonard too. I mean, they could really.
Oh my God, I would love that.
That's one of the few teams I think that could really justify screw it. I mean, we know Kawhi can opt out after next season, but he could actually really help us. He's one of the few players that can move the needle for us. and he fits our timeline as far as competing with Lowry and DeRozan. If you could get him, you'd have to give up like an OG, a pick, and probably a lot more than that. I don't know.
Hold on. Let me think of a salary matcher. It would have to, because I'm really all in on this idea now. It would have to be probably Norman Powell, because he moves up to like $9 million next year, $10 million, something like that. Young player you could sell on San Antonio, I think. OG Anunoby has to be involved for sure. Probably DeLon Wright too, and probably like 2 picks.
Yeah, and we've talked about Kawhi deals in the past, and I think that can be topped by other teams, but if other teams aren't offering a formidable deal, I think that Toronto has a play here, and that might be something to look at. And they have the assets, I think, to at least get San Antonio's attention. And if I'm going to trade for a win-now move, that's the kind of guy, this is an understatement because Kawhi's a top 5 player when he's healthy, but that's the kind of guy who can actually make a difference, even against LeBron. And that's the key. If LeBron stays in the East, I like that point about LeBron in 2018. If he stays in the East, I just don't know how you can really feel confidently at all that the current roster, and they're probably going to trade somebody, right? Because they're already in the tax. They're going to make a move of some sort, whether that's Ibaka.
The easy move to do it, though, is to get rid of Powell.
Sure. Yeah. And if another team will take him on, because I don't know what his play is. Conceptually, he makes a lot of sense on a lot of teams. It just comes down to your evaluation, because he wasn't really even in the rotation as far as competitive basketball a lot of points this year. I don't know if that's just because the rest of Toronto's depth is really good, or it's just he took a step back. So yeah, if you're a team, I would take a flyer on him for sure, based on what I've seen in the past. But they're gonna make some kind of move. But I would really be enticed by that Kawhi idea if that actually comes to the table, and other offers don't really trump what Toronto offers. But I think that they probably will.
I think that they probably get trumped as well. I don't know that, but that would be my read on what the market would probably be. But yeah. I think you're right that they're a team that should go all in on Kawhi. I'm trying to think of anyone else that they could potentially try and go all in on. Could you try and sign and trade for Paul George maybe? But
sure.
Paul would have to want to sign there too. So
exactly.
Yeah. So sign and trades don't even really work for them. I don't know. They're in a weird spot. Jimmy Butler, if Minnesota decides to blow it up a little bit. Oh, actually, it could be really fun for them. Andrew Wiggins.
Oh yeah, that's really fascinating. What do you think that would take? Just at a purely hypothetical nature. What do you
because
think
of
the return would be?
Canada connection, you'd almost have to involve you'd almost have to involve Serge from just a money perspective, and then. Well, maybe the move is Kyle. Maybe the move is Kyle and DeLon Wright for Andrew Wiggins.
Interesting. That's a fascinating deal. I'm not the highest on Wiggins, so it's hard for me to evaluate that just because I don't know if Lowry puts Minnesota on top, but that's a really fascinating kind of construct of a deal.
Yeah, because Kyle would give them the tough point guard that I'm sure Tom Thibodeau would love.
Yep.
And then they'd be getting off of the Wiggins money. Toronto could easily sell Andrew Wiggins to that fan base if he doesn't even get any better from what he is now. That's actually interesting to me.
Yeah, and I think overall, that's a really fascinating deal. But it comes back to me is if LeBron stays in the East, Kawhi Leonard's the one guy that actually makes a difference. Even getting Paul George, you're of course going to sign and trade for Paul George if you can get him. I don't know if he moves the needle against LeBron, but Kawhi can actually guard him. He's one of the 2 guys in the league that can guard LeBron and gives you that offensive firepower in conjunction with that. So if they can make a play for him, I think that's one of the teams where you really can see the short-term effect being worth it.
And let me just be a little bit transparent on something here. The Raptors lost game 1 by 1 point in a game they realistically probably should have won. They lost game 3 by 2 points on a LeBron buzzer beater. This was not far. This was 2 shots from going the opposite way in this series. And if this series is 2-2 going back to Toronto, what happens? I don't know what happens in this series. Do you?
It's a good point. Game 1, I thought, came down to the offensive rebounding opportunities at the end of the game. I don't know. Again, I just think the level LeBron's playing at, what was the counter really? I know they were in games, but LeBron playing at that level, they just didn't have the answer. I would have agreed if DeRozan was playing at a higher level and they could really have that offensive firepower to really, but that just wasn't the case in this one. Yeah,
I think that's a fair point. Also, Kyle Lowry was not super bad in the series. I didn't think he was actually relatively okay. He averaged 18 points and 9 assists on a 73% true shooting percentage. He wasn't great defensively, but Kyle wasn't the problem in this series. DeMar DeRozan having a 47% true shooting percentage on his usage, that was a problem. Serge Ibaka being inefficient offensively and being a total dumpster fire defensively, that was a problem. Jakob Poeltl not being able to actually like use his body defensively in any way because he was like super hyper in game one and then wasn't really a factor the rest of the way. Like that was the problem. Like Kyle was good. Jonas was good. CJ I thought was good when he was on the floor. I thought Anunoby actually like made LeBron work, and I thought Siakam made LeBron work. It's just that LeBron's in this, haze right now where he can't feel his face because he's so hot.
It just goes like he's historically great right now. We can't lose context of how good LeBron is right now in this moment. Like you're talking about potentially the best player of all time playing right now. And you need either one hell of a defensive scheme. I think that Boston can give Cavs some problems with their switchability, even though I think LeBron can take anybody in their team in the post, even Shemi Ojeleye to a lesser extent, but he can still make it work. But you have to have really, really high level talent to beat LeBron right now. And the Raptors just didn't have that. I mean, just being frank, like Kyle Lowry saw, like you noted, DeMar disappointed. They just don't have enough guys that can get to LeBron's level. Like obviously the Warriors have multiple guys that can do that. And it's going to take a team like that to beat LeBron at the level he's playing at right now.
Yeah, and Houston would be interesting to me too. Houston does have multiple guys who can get to LeBron's level, and Chris Paul and James Harden, obviously. I'm sorry. I got really excited about Clint Capella in my brain for a second because he's been awesome in this playoffs as well. But I don't think Clint can get to LeBron's level quite yet.
You don't say.
Yeah, you don't say. Shocking, I know. Cole, I think that's about all we got today. Tell the people where they can find your work. Tell the people what's going on with you.
Same as usual at thestepin.com. I'm officially going to start working on my big board next week, so I'll have some articles out there. Excited to talk more about the draft. I mean, the playoffs have been awesome, but it's going to start scaling back a little bit. Will allow us to get to more draft prospects on this podcast, on other podcasts that I do. But as usual, continue to listen to this podcast, and we'll try to incorporate more draft in the future. I'm
in mourning right now because the Penguins lost. It is a terrible, terrible day for me. It's terrible next couple of months for me. I don't know what I'm going to do without the Stanley Cup in my life. It's been so long since I've felt like this, where the Penguins are no longer playing going into mid-May. I guess I'll get over it, though. Please subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, SoundCloud, Google Play, Android, any podcasting app that you listen to. We're up there right now. Pocket Casts as well. I think we're up on Overcast as well. A lot of different apps you can use. Please leave us ratings, reviews, subscriptions. It really helps us move up in the ratings, helps us get the word out about the podcast as well. Keep it locked here. I'll be back later this week. I'm going to talk about the Western Conference, playoffs at some point, because I guess that they matter, even though we're just hurtling towards the inevitable with Houston and Utah. It's about all I got, though. Until next time, we'll talk soon. Bye.